Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining our last webinar of the Spring 2025 webinar series. Today, we will be discussing the impacts of inclusive higher education. Before we even get there, we want to just start by saying welcome and thank you for joining us. Today will be kind of a conversation, so if you have questions, please interrupt us and ask. We also do have Q&A time specifically allotted after each main section, and then at the end of the webinar today, there will be a brief feedback survey. If you would fill that out, that is so helpful for me as I start to plan our fall webinar topics. I want to know what you want to know about. So that's a great place for you to share that, and it should only take about 30 seconds or less to complete. And then tomorrow I will be sending out the recording as well as all resources, and those will also be put on our website. With that, let's jump in. Just so you can kind of know who our staff is, we have Greg, Shana, and then I am Elise. We are going to be running through the webinar today. You can always come back after and get our contact information. We're always here to help. Email, text, call, website contact, whatever works for you, works for us. With that, we're going to roll in and quickly give a brief outline, background of who we are. So as a nonprofit, we were formed about 10 years ago when a group of concerned parents joined together and realized that we were the last of 3 states at that point to offer inclusive higher ed, and they wanted to change that. And so they went to the state and asked for some seed funding to begin our first 3 pilot schools, and since then we've just continued to grow. As a nonprofit, over here on that right side, those blue boxes tend to be where we focus our efforts. That last one, outcomes, is specifically what we are talking about in today's webinar. So really looking at what happens when our graduates leave and go out into the world, and what kinds of successes do they experience, as well as what kinds of challenges. And again, that is what we are talking about today. All of that is to say, IN does not provide direct services on campus. There are wonderful staff members who do that on each of the 8 campuses, and we support them. We just are not them. And with that, we do have a pretty full agenda today to get through. So we are going to give a really brief overview of inclusive higher education. We go through that overview in much greater detail in earlier webinars, which you can find on our website. But just for the sake of time today, that will be a little bit more of a umbrella kind of overview. Then Shannon will talk about some of the national outcomes, what's happening with inclusive higher education across the nation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Then I will talk about what that looks like in Colorado and how our statewide numbers compare to the national numbers. And then we really want to end with some practical impacts. We know that data only tells some of a story. And when we turn our students into numbers, a lot of their true successes and true challenges get lost. So Shana will end by sharing some stories of just 3 students. We have many more that we could share, but we can't fit it all in an hour. And that's going to be sort of how we finish off today. So with that, let's jump right in. We are going to briefly, again, give an overview of inclusive higher ed. If you have questions, please ask or watch one of our previous webinars. So inclusive higher ed provides an alternative admissions pathway for students with intellectual disability and or other disability category that requires them to need both accommodations and modifications to be successful at the college level. Because students earn modifications, or I should say receive modifications, the depth and breadth of their expected understanding is less than what it is for a traditional degree-seeking student. And so students walk out with a certificate credential. You'll see CHEC throughout this presentation. That stands for Comprehensive Higher Education Certificate. That is really weighty. It's very, very meaningful. It is granted by the same office on campus that does grant degrees, but it is not a degree. And so we like to be very open and upfront about that. If you think your student could be successful in college on a degree path, our most recent webinar talked about other types of support that students can receive on that trajectory if you think that's a better path for them. It is fully inclusive, fully normative, so students receive all kinds of supports in the classes with the same peers and same professors as every other student in that campus or in those classes, and all of their courses align with their career goal, knowing that, of course, the goal for all college students is they graduate ready to enter the workforce. With that, they receive lots of support in their career readiness, in their independent living. They're fully integrated into their campus community, and they receive support from both staff and peer mentors in the 4 domains of academics, social life, career, and independence. This is going to be kind of the focus of our webinar today, where we're going to share outcomes in each of these 4 pillars. So I'm not going to go over these in a lot of depth. Really, what I will say, and then I'll move on, is that if you notice, all 4 of these yellow circles are the same size, and they're all connected by that greater circle around the outside. All of that is to say that none of these pillars is more important or less important than any of the others. They really are interconnected, and they do inform each other. And when we see students grow in one area, we almost always see them grow in the other 3 areas as well. All right, so quickly, where in Colorado can students receive inclusive higher education services? The Office of Inclusive Services at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs is the only accredited IHE in the state, which means they've gone through a pretty robust process to receive an additional national certification showing that they're really providing very high quality services to students there. At UCCS, students can choose to live in apartments, and in 2 school years, they will have the additional choice to live in dorms if they would like. And that is a 4-year certificate program. Elevate at ACC is a commuter campus. The community college inclusive higher ed model in Colorado is 3 years to receive that certificate. Global at Regis University, they do offer dorm living for students who want that. They have a 1-year track, a 2-year track, a 3-year track, and a 4-year track, with years 2 and 3 being the most popular choices that students choose. And then UNC, Go On and Learn, we call it GOAL, is in Greeley. Students there can choose to live in dorms if they would like, and that's a more traditional 4-year certificate program. All 4 of these programs have received a federal designation called CTP. Practically, what that means for students and families is that students can receive federal financial aid in the form of grants and in the form of work study. They cannot receive federal student loans at this time. And then again, just another reminder, students will walk out with that same comprehensive higher education certificate. CSU in Fort Collins has the Rams Scholars Program. This is a specific program to train students for the agricultural jobs and trades that are available in Northern Colorado, and that is a 3-year program. They'll have on-campus living eventually, but they don't yet. MSU Denver has the Inclusive Higher Education Solutions Program. That's on that Auraria campus right downtown. That is a commuter campus for all students. Lots of students access it from the light rail, bus, Uber, all kinds of, however they want to commute there. And that is a 4-year program. And then Lamar Community College and Pikes Peak State College are both jumping on board next fall with 3-year programs. LCC will have on-campus living probably in 2 more school years. Pikes Peak is a commuter campus for everybody. And then all 4 of these schools have that CTP, that federal financial aid designation, in progress, and we'll have it hopefully very, very soon. All right, before I move on to the meat of the webinar, can I answer any questions? All right, then let's jump right in.
Thanks, Elise. I'm going to kickstart us with the national outcomes. And the reason why we want to start here is because inclusive higher education has happened nationally long before it's happened in Colorado. So inclusive higher education started in 2008 at the national level. And so they've had more years of data and development to kind of speak to the outcomes that they're seeing nationally. And we also want that to inform how we're comparing nationally as a state. We're pretty proud of the things that we're doing and the outcomes that we're seeing in the programs that we have. But we definitely lean on these national resources. So think college as the national hub, I would say, for inclusive higher education, or they refer to it as inclusive post-secondary education, or IPSE. And they report on outcomes from across the states every single year. And so a lot of the data that we're going to be speaking to in this section is coming from a 2023 report where they are focused on TIPSID programs, which is a handful of programs out of all of the national programs. You'll see on this map, there are more than 360 programs nationwide serving students with intellectual disability, which is really exciting. We're proud of Colorado kind of standing out there with 8 programs to offer. But there's a lot happening nationally. And so the TIPSID programs are specified programs every few years that are receiving strategic technical assistance and support, and they collect data on those. So the data that we're reflecting from 2023 is speaking to 41 programs. And so just so you guys know, it's not speaking to every single 360 of those programs, but 41 from 2023. We linked a couple of helpful resources here. I think college has so many data sheets and just informative pieces of information for people. And we would encourage you to click on those links and check out how they write up their data because we're just going to give you a piece of it today. So when we talk about those 4 pillars, I think college also talks about those 4 pillars and some of those outcomes in all of the arenas that we see growth in our students. The biggest one that comes to mind is career or vocational outcomes. And so what we see at the national level is a 74% employment rate for graduates of inclusive higher education. And what we want to point out is they're not just going in and doing low paying jobs, but they're earning at or above minimum wage within 1 year after graduation. It's important to note the within 1 year after graduation because, like most college students, they're returning home, they're navigating a new system, and there's a lot to figure out. We know that's normative of any graduate, and so that's just one thing that we're keeping in mind as we look at our data. And I want us to compare that 74% employment rate of all of our graduates nationally to the 18% of individuals with IDD that are competitively employed nationally in general. So that's not talking about students that have completed inclusive higher education. That's just saying all individuals with IDD, only 18% of them are competitively employed, meaning that they're in a job that they can move up, that they're earning wages that are livable. And so that 74% is a really remarkable outcome for this population in contrast to that 18%. And so what this tells us is that students that complete inclusive higher education are up to 4 times more likely to be employed. And that's a pretty motivating number when we talk with families and students. And a big piece here is the competitive, integrative, and meaningful employment. So competitive meaning that our students and our graduates are applying for jobs and they're competing alongside neurotypical folks or non-disabled folks. They're not going to specified disability employment. They're going to the general population, general offerings. They're integrated, meaning that they're getting jobs where they're working alongside non-disabled peers. And then it's meaningful. So one of the biggest things that stands out to us as we talk about outcomes is that students that go to inclusive higher education have had time to explore what matters to them, what they're passionate about, types of jobs that maybe they've never been exposed to. And that's what they pursue post-graduation. And so those roles that they take are more meaningful to them because there's something about it that gives them intrinsic motivation. They feel compelled to be engaged in their community. And so those are really big words that you'll hear whenever we talk about career outcomes and career goals for students. And then on the academic front, we see a lot of things that are kind of standing out nationally. 98% of students in these IPSE or IAG programs participate in inclusive classes. So that means that there's a small portion that still have a little bit more exclusionary classes on their campus, but by and large, the majority are taking Intro to Com with their neurotypical student peers, and they're taking those courses inclusively. 59% had at least half of their courses inclusive, which is really important for us. That majority of coursework for students is inclusive. And then there's different types of credentials that are being earned at the national level. The majority, 65%, is coming from a certificate from that program specifically. I will note that nationally, that model is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes it's a certificate from the program. Sometimes it's a certificate that the program provides, but is accredited by the institution. And so there's some variability in those certifications that come out, but that's really the focus of this population is earning a certificate credential. 18% are earning degrees. Most of those are going to fall under the associate's level, but some students and some programs serve particular students that can earn an associate's or a bachelor's. 11% are coming out with industry specific certificates. And I foresee this being an increased number over the next few years because we're just seeing that increase in post-secondary education in general. And then 6% is other. This might be just kind of like completion certificates or various options. But by and large, what we're seeing is graduates are earning a certificate from their program. And then that 75% offered a credential approved by their institution. So you'll see kind of how that contrasts to Colorado, but that is one thing that has been up and coming and really been a high priority in inclusive higher education nationally. And then our social outcomes, another pivotal part of the college experience. And something that we really want to track is, are our students engaging socially once they leave college? I think back to my college experience and I loved my social life, and it is very different post-college. You kind of have to navigate some new things. So the goal of these programs is that our students are learning the skills they need to be able to continue engaging socially. And so what we love at the national level, we see 100% of these campuses offer inclusive access to clubs, organizations, events, all those things. Students are not siloed, they're participating fully across their campus. And then 83% of grads reported satisfaction with social life post-graduation. So for this population who typically, when they graduated K-12, were sitting at home or going to day programs or feeling very isolated, that 83% is really revolutionary. And then independence. And when we think of independence, I want us to think more broadly than just living on your own in an apartment. There's lots of things that add to the level of independence that a young adult might feel. Granted, that's going to be the priority of most of these stats, but I do just want to speak to that our graduates are experiencing skill development that even if they're not living on their own, they're practicing more independence in their day-to-day life. So 64% of students during their time in their college program lived in housing. That's where they had like hands-on experience living away from mom and dad, which is a rarity for this population. So the fact that we have more than half of our students participating in that is really, really big, and helps them experience fully the breadth of living on your own and identifying what needed supports you have. And then what we've seen nationally, and Elise, you can go to the next one because I kind of want you guys to see this in tandem. 1 year out from graduation, 66% of our graduates nationally, so national graduates are living with their family. So that typically, when we hear that, we're like, oh man, that's not very independent. There are lots of factors that can add to that. But what I really want to point out is that in the following year, so 2 years out from graduation, 52% lived with families. So there's kind of this progression that we've seen with graduates nationally and locally, that when they graduate, there's so much to reacclimate to that trying to get a job, living on your own, engaging socially all at once can be a lot. And so we've seen this year over year progression where they're kind of attaining a new goal in a new category after a couple of years. And so seeing that 66% drop to 52% after an additional year, I think speaks to the fact that our students develop those skills when they're in the programs, but need some space and time and coordination post-graduation to really step into implementing those things. But we do love seeing that number, that percentage is dropping where students are feeling or graduates are feeling far more equipped to live independently. And when we say living independently, that does not mean you're on your own in an apartment. That might mean you live with a friend. That might mean you live with a care attendant that's not a family member. That might even mean like a host home that requires some more independence. And so there's a few categories that fall under that level. Awesome. Okay, so I think Elise will be able to speak to what those pillars and the outcomes in those pillars look like in Colorado, and that's really where we want to land. But if you guys have any questions for me about the national stats, I'm happy to do my best to speak to them. Awesome.
All right. Well, interrupt me if I am beginning too quickly. But I do want to jump into the Colorado outcomes where I think it's a little bit more tangible, where we can see what's really happening here in our own backyard. So initially, I think it's important to share, where did we get this data from? So every year we do a survey of grads as well as other stakeholders, where we ask a variety of questions. So last summer of 2022, we sent a survey to all 63 graduates and their parents, a good, quote unquote, good response rate for online surveys is considered somewhere between 20 and 30%. We had a 29% grad response rate and a 21% parent response rate. So we are statistically within that expected range. However, of only 63 grads and 63 parents, we recognize the overall number is low. So hopefully as we have more grads, we can get more accurate data. But this is the data that we have. And then we also, as I said, surveyed current students last spring, as well as their parents, additional stakeholders as well. And so the data that I am about to share is from those surveys, and all of them were anonymous. All right, so to begin with academics, when we asked students, what do you study? Across all of our campuses, we had 22 unique areas of study. And what that really tells me is that we really have a situation in Colorado where students are able to study whatever they're interested in, right? They're not necessarily pigeonholed into one or two or three areas of study, right? Students are really given a broad array of choice, which hopefully will set them up for the career of their choice, which I think is really exciting. The overwhelming majority, 90.6% of students, when we ask them, are you satisfied, neutral, or unsatisfied with the supports that your inclusive higher education staff provides to you? Almost all of them said they're by and large quite satisfied with those supports. And in fact, 97.4% said that because of the inclusive higher education program, they are working to achieve their academic goals. And I think that's exciting, right? That's like, I think one student who said that it's not doing that, and I'll bet that was, they answered the wrong button, to be honest, because their comments kind of said the other way. And then 76.5% of grads said they pursued or plan to pursue further education. To me, I think that's a really exciting statistic. When I talk to a lot of our students and grads about what kind of brought them to college, so many of them tell me that they did not really like school in high school or in middle school. And so then they go to college and they experience that and they learn how to learn and they're taking classes they're interested in, right? The fact that they want to keep going to college, to me, is actually quite exciting. And lots of students receive that CHEC, right? That comprehensive higher education certificate, and then want to get a degree. They want to keep furthering their education and opening more pathways. I think that's quite exciting. Just to add a little more color to some of these academics outcomes, all students in Colorado participate in inclusive courses. As Shana shared the national outcomes as well, it was nearly all. Well, in Colorado, it is 100% of students receive inclusive coursework. Typically, the model in Colorado is we have about 3 courses that students take per semester, where 2 are entirely inclusive, on track for students' career goals, and then 1 additional class will train students for more life skills, job skills, independent living skills, all things like that. And those may or may not be inclusive, but certainly more than 50% of students' classes will be inclusive, which is in line with that national statistic as well. In Colorado, we do have that credential, right, which is credit bearing, and it is approved by each institution. So 100% of our students walk out with a credential that is approved by the school, not just by the program, right? Which means it does have a little bit more weight to it, right? And a little bit more meaning and a little more possibility of what students can do with it after they graduate. When we look at what types of credentials students earned, 94% earned that certificate, and 6% earned an associate's or higher. Only 1 student earned higher than an associate's, mostly that is an associate's degree. And all of those students did that at a community college. So that's kind of the model that is developing here in Colorado as we are now about 10 years out. The universities are really focused on robust programming in that independent living space, in that more holistic kind of area where students walk out with credentials. And then at the community college model, they are supporting more students who maybe can earn an associate's, but need a little bit more time to do that, or a little bit more support to do that. And then as we go on through our future, as Shana also mentioned, we are kind of moving as a society to a more trades-based kind of expectation, where lots of people are really looking for more trades-based outcomes. And so we are expecting industry credentials to kind of rise in majority, or maybe not majority, but in number of what students are walking out with, either in addition to or instead of that traditional higher ed certificate. And then when we are speaking about some of those career outcomes, 77.8% of grads out of those 63 grads are currently employed. That includes grads who have been graduated for a year. That includes grads who've been graduated for 5 years, right? Of that group, 77.8% feel that their college experience prepared them for their current job. That is over 3/4. I think that is exciting, but we do recognize there's room to grow in that. 81% are working 20 hours or less. 19% are working somewhere between 21 hours and 40 hours, and 14.3% are working 2 or more jobs. So of that amount who's working closer to 40 hours, many of them are doing that with multiple jobs. So again, we do recognize there is room to grow. And when we compare all of these numbers to that 18% stat that Shana shared in the national statistics, where 18% of the IDD population is competitively employed, right? And we have 77% of our grads who are employed, that is a major increase. 67% of our graduate respondents and 80% of their parents said that our grads are earning more than minimum wage. The average across both surveys was $17.60 an hour. Actually, I think one of them was $17.61. They were pretty close. Where our students are earning a bit more than minimum wage, the statewide minimum wage is 14 something. In Denver, it's even higher. So all of that is really exciting to see as well. And then of our grads, 61.1% are satisfied with their current employment situation. The reasons for unsatisfaction in that were because they wanted to work more, or they were working enough hours, but it wasn't quite the job that they wanted. And so maybe they're in a starter job and then looking to pivot in the future. So again, there is room to grow. And we recognize that that is somewhere that we, as a state, can continue to, take our trajectory. Our grads are employed across 11 unique industries. We cannot possibly list them all. So just for a few, we have healthcare, hospitality, education, arts and entertainment, retail, and many, many, many more. And then again, just to share some areas of growth a little more succinctly, we are looking at how we can improve some of those partnerships with DVR so that students are in better job situations based on their interests, based on what their goals were. And then we're also looking to improve employment networks, particularly in communities where there are not major colleges, right? Where if school, for example, if a student goes to school in Colorado Springs and then they move back home to the Western Slope, well, their college career coach can't really form relationships in their Western Slope communities, right? Or in their maybe local smaller communities. And so that is an area of growth where it's hard to go back to a hometown if there are not lots of employers who are willing to hire students with disabilities. And that is a growth point, I think, across the nation as well. And then we're also looking at how we can take student goals more in mind in terms of getting them employed in their areas of interest in the places where they hoped to be after they graduated. And then socially, 72.2% of our graduates say they are satisfied with their social life post-graduation. As Shana already mentioned, it's a little bit jarring to go from a college campus where your social life kind of is your life, right? Where it's so easy to get involved with sports or organizations or all kinds of things. So the fact that almost 3/4 of our grads are satisfied with their social life post-grad, I think actually speaks volumes to the skills that students have gained while they're in college, which we'll share on the next slide. 83.3% feel that college helped prepare them for social engagement in their broader community, and 87.4% are satisfied with the social supports that were provided on campus while they were in college. And then nearly everybody said they participated socially on campus. Again, I truly think everybody does participate socially on campus because those are parts of their graduation requirements. Students have to show that they are engaging in organizations, in clubs, in whatever way works best for them. But the data, again, says that nearly everybody, not quite everybody, is doing that. And then when we asked for comments on why did your, or how did your social skills improve, or why did they not improve, right? These are some of the comments that we saw from both grads and parents, and they kind of fell in a few key common buckets. So nearly everybody said that the student got better at planning social outings. They were able to send a text or a phone call or something to say, hey, let's meet up to watch the Nuggets game on Friday, kind of thing, right? Where their abilities to actually initiate social engagements grew. We also saw that students were better able to navigate, or I should say graduates, were better able to navigate social events. So if they showed up at a popular area that was really crowded, right, they were able to figure out how can I find my friend or the person I'm looking for. Also able to self-soothe better in situations that were maybe loud or not quite preferable for a student. We also saw that lots of comments said that the students or graduates were able to meet new people and able to kind of get involved in new environments in a much easier, more seamless way, as well as a diversity of social situations, where lots of comments said things like, I or my student used to only want to enter situations that were more predictable, places that they'd been before, and now they're willing to try new things, willing to expand my horizons, all kinds of things, to engage in brand new social situations, which I think really does speak volumes to what we're all asked to do as college students. And then again, we should be honest about what challenges exist. And what we see are that grads who live in more rural communities are struggling to engage in their social lives as meaningfully as students who live in more metropolitan areas. And then we also still see a reliance on things like Special Olympics or church groups or day programs or other types of groups that will plan social outings on behalf of students, or where students say, well, I'll just see friends on Tuesday at this thing, so I don't need to make plans this weekend. And I think that is an ever-evolving challenge, particularly in a post-COVID world for a lot of post-grad college students. I don't know that that really separates our grads from the flock majorly at all. And then in terms of independence, as Shana shared, that is not only independent living, but that is a big part of a lot of the statistics that we track, both nationally and at the state level. So we see 38.5% of our graduates report living independently, which could include either by themselves, with roommates, or with, could be a paid caregiver. 61.5% live with family, parents, grandparents, etc. And then 77.8% are satisfied with their current living situation. That includes people who live at home, right? A lot of our grads are happy to live with their parents or live with their siblings, and they don't want to move out. So it's important that we keep in mind what students' goals actually are. And then 66.7% feel that inclusive higher ed prepared them for their current living situation. There is room to grow there, right? Where we think that students can be better prepared for a variety of skills throughout college. So as I already mentioned, it is really important to consider what students and families' goals are. In both the student surveys and the family surveys, lots of people noted that they're not really interested in independent living. That's not a goal or a value for certain families. And so we do need to keep that in mind in terms of what students should be prepared for is the future that they want for themselves. I would say the biggest area of growth is that there is currently a discrepancy in what graduates think their independence skills are and what families think their students' skills are. So we asked the same questions of both graduates and their families. We listed a variety of independence or adulting skills and said, can you do this independently, or do you need help to do this skill? Or with the families, it was worded as, can your graduate do this independently, or are they supported in completing these tasks? And here is the results. So for the most part, we do see quite a bit of agreement, right? Or at least somewhat, where the grads and parents tend to agree on what types of skills can be done independently or what types of skills can be done with support. Some big ones I want to call out, some of these financial ones, managing a bank account, paying bills, managing benefits, are the largest areas where parents think that graduates need support. And for the most part, the grads do agree, but some of them do think they can do it independently. More grads thought they could do it independently than their parents thought they could, which is an interesting thing to note. Communicating with employers, The vast majority of grads said, yep, I communicate with my boss all by myself, as were more parents think, no, my grad does need some support with that. So that is an interesting area to call out as well. And then the last one we want to call out is transportation, where this is the only area actually where grads thought they needed more support than what their parents thought they needed. And we think the reason why is that for grads, they are thinking, I'm not driving myself, therefore I'm not doing it independently. As where parents are thinking, well, I'm not driving them. They're navigating Uber, they're navigating public transportation, so they are doing it independently. And so perhaps in the future, we might need to change the wording of that question or ask for more comment boxes to try to get down to the bottom of that one in particular. But it is interesting to track kind of where they all think their various skill sets fall. Before we move on, any questions?
Alrighty, I'm gonna jump us into the practical impacts. And I think anytime that we're taking a look at stats, as Elise mentioned at the beginning, we want to make sure that we're thinking beyond just the numbers, because students are holistic and they have complex lives and complex dynamics. And a lot of what we see in inclusive higher education is students come in and they set their goals in those 4 pillars. It's not dictated for them. And that's really important. Anytime that we're looking at our survey responses, is we're keeping that in mind. What was the student's goal? And so that's kind of what I want to speak to when we're looking at like what do we actually see? How is this actually impacting real students? And so we can only give you a few examples, but we do really think that these examples are pretty representative of all of our graduates and what they're experiencing. And so hopefully it gives you a little bit of tangible pieces. So, the big question that we get asked all the time is like, is this really worth it? Is the cost of higher education, is the leap to sending my student away to college who has historically been so kept close, is it worth it? And we're seeing both nationally and locally that it is for a number of reasons, not just that employment rate or that earnings rate, right? That they're earning more wages, but that's broader than that. And I encourage folks all the time to think back to when you went to college. Most of the time when we ask people about their college education, they don't talk to us about, or their college experience, they don't talk to us about their favorite exam that they took or even internship sometimes. A lot of times they talk about like just how they figured out who they were and what they loved and what they wanted to do with their future. It's this unique season of life and a unique campus culture where everything is in place for you to just develop as a holistic person. And so those are the things that I want us to look at as we look at these practical impacts. And so when I talk about the power of inclusion and academic challenge, this is really big for our students with intellectual disabilities. Students enrolled in inclusive higher education programs historically spend majority of their K-12 time in a separated special education classroom. It is very rare that our students are fully included in general education classes before they come to college. So they don't learn how to engage with high level content or to communicate their needs or to self advocate or to learn even the impacts of their disability in a typical environment. It's very isolated. But what we see when our students in inclusive higher education are being included and also challenged, not being kept at bay because they have some sort of diagnosis, but they're being challenged academically. Those modifications might be fading over time. What that does for a student's confidence and growth and self-determination, we could never, ever articulate in a statistic. And so that is really important for us to keep our minds focused on. And when I talk with students, when Elise talks with our students, by and large, when we ask them what has been the best part of going to college or what have you learned about yourself, this is what we hear. That they have increased their confidence, that they know what their goals are, they have self-advocacy, they have agency, they have a focus. And it has been really remarkable to see students when we get to mentor students. We run a mentorship program for high school students interested in college. And a lot of times those students are very unsure about what they want to do or why they want to do it or what skills they even have or strengths they have. And it's cool to see some of those students that have started with that uncertainty pursue inclusive higher education, become a graduate, and be able to say, I know where I'm going with my future. And then another piece of this is students who are now being included on a college campus. When they graduate, they now identify that they have value in their community, no matter if it's on the college campus or not. That learned inclusion translates to any community or situation that they end up in post-graduation. And so our students are engaging more fully in their community because they've experienced that natural inclusion on these college campuses. And that adds to a meaningful life, right? Where you feel connected. And we want that just as much as we want employment outcomes for our students. And then lastly, one of the big things, because Elise had mentioned we have graduates employed across 11 industries. And some of those industries include, and we'll talk about some of these particular examples, in healthcare, working as a education assistant, working just in a variety of experiences that they didn't have the skill sets for before. These jobs don't necessarily require associates or bachelor's level education, but what our students receive when they're in their programs is they develop the skills that help them not only obtain that employment, but maintain that employment. And that's what we see with our graduates is they stick around their employment for years because they're able to maintain that. They've been able to develop grit and navigate challenges because of their experience in inclusive higher education. And so no matter what that job outcome is, we do look at the skills that they require to be able to maintain it. And that's what we're seeing in our graduates across Colorado. So let me tell you some stories. These are stories from our first pilot sites or schools, which are ACC, UNC, and UCCS. We've had our first graduates in 2020, and so we've been able to collect data from those students since 2020. Always small cohorts because these are not huge programs of 100 plus students at each school. But we love that that allows us to get to know these students' stories. And Jasmine was one of the first graduates in the state of Colorado. So she graduated from Elevate at Arapahoe Community College in 2020. And I had the joy of working with Jasmine, actually. I worked at Elevate at the time. And she really wanted to focus on healthcare. So she earned her comprehensive higher education certificate, which is that modified certificate where she was taking healthcare courses. They were kind of ad hoc to help her just develop an awareness of the industry, get exposure to that industry, learn a lot. And in that process, over time, she established skills that allowed her to be successful in courses. Her modifications were being reduced year after year. And then she determined I can and I want to pursue a non-modified credential, which was the CNA credential or that certified nursing assistant credential. That did not come without challenge. She had to retake classes a couple of times. She wasn't able to nail the exams at first and had to redo those, but she again had the support from the program, the experience from that modified certificate support to be able to have that grit and persistence. And she did earn that CNA, and that really helped set her up for success in her future. So when she graduated, she's shared with us, you'll see at the bottom of this slide at the end, a link to a story about Jasmine, just where you can get all the details about her experience. She navigated employment struggles right out of the gate. Things like not feeling like DVR was placing her in jobs or helping her get placed in jobs that were in line with her area of interest, and she had to really advocate. And then maybe some really tricky employer situations. I know she navigated some difficulty with not having good communication with an employer and where that landed her. So there are some bumpy pieces in that first year after graduation. But what I love, again, is that she persisted and she continued focusing on her goals. And now she works in her chosen area of interest. She's actually a dietary technician at Skyridge Hospital, which is a wonderful hospital. And she's moved her way up into that role. And she's actually been acknowledged as an employee there. She's received some awards because of her dedication in that role. And she really loves it. She loves her community at Skyridge. She loves working in the healthcare facility, and she has a meaningful job. She's providing nutrition-based meals to residents and making sure that that tracks with all of their dietary needs, tracking their charts, all of those pieces. So she's really loving that work. And then she also has been able to build up the skills to live independently. So she lives in her own apartment. She has a dog. She's navigated transportation independently and kind of has her own ecosystem of like she lives close by Sky Ridge. She's got a long-term boyfriend. And so she's really, you'll see in the quote up there, she says, "I'm most proud of achieving goals I was told by some that were not possible for me, including going to college and living on my own, but it's all come together for me and I couldn't be more happy." And so she is really a wonderful student example of what these things, what inclusive higher education can help develop in an individual to be able to attain their goals in all of those pillars. So that's Jasmine's story. And then we also have Shannon. So Shannon is from UNC in Greeley, or that's where she attended school, excuse me. So she graduated in 2022. And she actually traveled to UNC Greeley from the Western Slope. She's originally from Grand Junction, and she had tried earning an associate's degree at the local institution in Grand Junction and didn't have the support that she needed to be successful. And so she found out about inclusive higher education and she selected UNC as the space for her. And so she pursued that comprehensive higher education certificate at UNC. And her focus was in human services. I think she had a pretty broad awareness of like, I want to help. I want to be in the helping profession of some sort. And so she studied classes in human services, took things like psychology and things like that. And then really allowed, it's fun to see that now her job utilizes some of those coursework that she participated in. So after graduating in 2022, she did do that big hike back to her hometown, which felt really daunting. We have a couple of links to interviews that we've done with her where she was really nervous about moving back home. She had the support from her inclusive higher education community in Greeley, but then moved back home. And so she had to navigate the employment situation there. So she moved back home with her family initially. And at first, she started just as a part-time worker in a foster care agency. She had an internship during her time in Goal at a foster care agency, and so that was really transferable. And she had help from her employment coordinator at Goal to coordinate support at this foster care agency back in Grand Junction. So she had a little bit of guidance as she got there, started at part-time, and was living with family. And then I think it was probably about a year that she was at that pace. And then she found out that she could apply to be a paraeducator. So in Grand Junction, the expectations or the required educational needs to be a paraeducator are a little bit different than some of our metro areas. And so she didn't need an associate's or a bachelor's. Her certificate was sufficient. And so she applied to be a paraeducator in her district and has been doing that ever since. So she is now full-time employed. She receives benefits. And the kicker with that is that she is communicating with students that were in a similar classroom to her when she was in K-12 and telling them that they can go to college, that they can develop these skills, that they can be independent. Which has been really wonderful. And so she has loved that transition from foster care over to working in the classroom and being able to empower students with disabilities. And then most recently, she has transitioned to living independently. Again, that was not right out of the gate. She was working part-time, living at home, then took on full-time, kind of navigated what that looked like, and then was able to, with the support of her family, find independent living. I believe she's with a roommate, if I'm not mistaken. And I think this is just the first year that she's doing it. So that's, 2+ years post-graduation that she's been able to navigate that, but really has been able to see the full fruit of learning those skills in college. And then she participates a lot in social gatherings with coworkers and church friends. So she has a close connection to some church groups, but also has built really strong relationships with her coworkers. So there's a couple of links down here for you guys to read a little bit more about Shannon's story, how she advocates for these programs statewide. Yeah, so we encourage you to check those out. And then lastly is Michael from UCCS. So this is the program over in Colorado Springs. Michael is a joy, if you can't tell from his photo, but he graduated also in 2022 from UCCS. And he also was a recipient of that comprehensive higher education certificate, also in human services. That has kind of been a common interest for our students. A lot of students love education. Some students love like tech industry stuff, but human services or a helping profession tends to be a big category that our students are interested in. So he had, while he was at UCCS, lots of different job experiences that were kind of across a lot of different areas just to build some exposure. And so he learned, and I'd ask him anytime after graduation, like, what do you want to do? And he's like, I just want to help people. I want to be connected to people. And so he had lots of experiences in that employment space. He lived on independently on campus with his roommates and had a blast. He's one of the graduates that like coordinates monthly guy hangs post graduation because he loved it so much. So he had a lot of that experience. So post graduation, his primary goal was to live independently. He loved having that independence from his family and he wanted to maintain that. And so pretty quickly after graduation, he was set up with his own apartment. And to this day, he is living on his own. There's no roommates, there's no care attendants, and he navigates some support from family as needed, but also Medicaid waivers as needed. And then for employment, so he now works two part-time jobs, and employment was also pretty rocky for him right out of the gate, coming from UCCS where his supports are in Colorado Springs, and he moved over to the Lakewood area, back to where his family was. So he didn't have those same connections there. So he had been kind of fumbling through part-time work. And right now he has two part-time jobs. The first one, you can go to the next bullet for me, Elise. The first one that he was working has just been Walgreens. That's been kind of the opportunity that he had, and he took it for the time being, but he was still looking at something that would allow him to use the skills that he developed in the coursework that he took while he was at UCCS. And so recently, he's been able to start as a video correspondent, which is where he's doing interviews for a media group that helps raise awareness about disability organizations in the state of Colorado. So he's now connected a little bit more to that original interest of helping people, where he's interviewing, he's meeting with nonprofits, and he's sharing that information through this group called Stay Looped, which we'd encourage you guys to check out. So he's one of those students that is having to work two part-time jobs to make it work. One is really in an area of interest and one is not, and maybe not our ideal, but is something that he still believes he developed the skills in order to obtain and maintain that role at Walgreens. And then Michael is somebody who continues to engage in advocacy. He really, really believes in the power of inclusion and wants to tell everybody to go to college no matter what. So you'll see his quote is like, never be afraid and never be discouraged from anything. He really wants to empower students with ID to pursue their goals. Awesome. So those, like we mentioned, it's only 3 students out of the 63, soon to be 88 graduates that are coming down the pike in Colorado from our programs. But hopefully that gives you a picture of all of the ways that our students are evolving and growing and succeeding post-graduation. But please let us know if you have any questions about that.
And then as we end, we know there's only 3 minutes left, but we do want to provide lots of resources. So I encourage you, as you receive these slides and watch back through the recording, to click some of those links, particularly to those student stories. They are more inspiring than I could possibly try to put into words. So please look at those, as well as, if you're curious, some of those national statistics. We linked as many as we could in there as well. But we also have lots of other resources for you that are on our website. So you can just go to our main website page. You can also look at a variety of past webinars. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter if you want to just receive information more passively, more updates. That's what that is. And then student stories, lots of other stories like those of the 3 that Shanna shared. Our newest graduates many of them are in there. So please engage with those for more awesome inspiration. But then we would be remiss not to share some national resources. If you are not familiar with Think College, that is a national resource hub that is very similar to IN, but they do work on more of the national scale. They do a lot of that national research that we did share, that some of those data points came from Think College. So a wide variety of resources there that can help prepare students and families going into the next stage. And then our last ask, as I mentioned, is to please fill out the survey. Let us know what we're doing and what kinds of webinars we can provide for our fall semester. Thank you very much for joining.